All right. Well, we're live, and now I just realized that I'm out of beer. So I'm gonna leave you alone.
Okay.
For about 2 seconds while I run and grab another drink.
Sounds good.
If you could do a song and dance, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. I'll do that. Welcome back.
So, Dave, did you have class today? Like, or you worked?
Yeah, we were back.
Okay. How is that
Yeah.
for you as a teacher to go back after being off for several days?
It's about as bad as it is for the kids. Because, you know, I don't know. I was talking to another person, another teacher, and neither of us could get out of bed this morning. We just didn't have the motivation, to do the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's a therapeutic day school, so the kids bring extra challenges than, more so than they do in other settings. You know, they're struggling. And this time of year, whenever there's like an extended break, more time away from school makes things intensified on campus. So yeah, no one's happy. No one's happy the Monday returning after a holiday. No.
Right. Sarah's. I just didn't teach today. Homeschool win. Nice.
Oh, whatever. Congratulations.
How are
Oh,
the kids after a few days off? Like, I mean, that's just got to be like a slow, tough start for the kiddos too.
it's very difficult. A lot of them are dysregulated, and it shows up right away. And
Mm.
all of them, there are very few of them that are just like on their game and ready to get back to things. Whether it's because they had issues at home or because the the sort of stability that we provide as a school with the counselors. Franklin, I don't know who that is.
It's one of the people that are on. So one of the people are celebrating someone
Oh,
else.
I
It's
love
this guy.
that.
I believe Capozzi has a drink too. His is a little bit stronger than mine though, I think. Mine is Yingling, so
Mine is
cheers.
Woodford Reserve.
Oh, Woodford Reserve, nice. I was gonna get
But yeah,
like Schlitz or something, so that way I could be
yes.
Oh man.
Yeah, that feels like an authentic 70s theologian.
Yes. Yeah. So what are you guys on right now in your class? What are you guys talking about?
We're talking Second Amendment, Don. So,
Really?
as you know, I teach civics. So
Yeah.
this was totally unplanned, but I had just completed the First Amendment, and we took our time on the First Amendment. We went through, the
Did you
five.
talk about it a lot?
We did freely. We with limitations freely spoke about it. And then, honestly, we came to the Second Amendment the day after, I believe it was. Yeah, the day after the shooting at Club Q.
Mm. Mm.
And so we had a really actually powerful
I
conversation
imagine.
at the school. Yeah, yeah.
In
So yeah,
about
there
4
you go.
seconds, this is going to kick you off and just focus on me as it should be.
Yay.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Faith Uncensored, and tonight we have Dave Capozzi with us. He is going to be hanging out, and we're trying to convince him. So, with the best that you can in chat, really muster up this encouragement to try and get Dave to be a part of this conversation more often. So, just a quick reminder: all questions are on the table. Nothing is censored, and the only thing we ask is that you're kind and compassionate and generous to the people in chat. And with that, we are all going to just really hopefully have a good conversation. Dave and I have a couple things we want to kind of talk about tonight, a couple basic concepts or basic topics. So we're going to do those, but we'll also be featuring some of your questions. Please make sure in the chat you put a Q and a colon. That helps us to be able to find your questions when we go looking for them. And it helps us to be able to find them easily amidst all the other conversations happening. Too bad you used all your bad dad jokes 2 minutes ago, Don. Yeah, well, you know. All right, folks. So with that, Mr. Capozzi is with us. And so Dave, if you do not know, Dave is the host and the main dude for Dig New Streams podcast. Does a lot of really great conversations on there. I highly recommend you check it out. Dave, where else can people find you?
In a corner, in a dark corner somewhere. They can find
A
me.
dark corner of TikTok.
TikTok, yeah. I post daily on TikTok. And oftentimes the conversations that I'm having on TikTok, if I'm going to do an episode on my own on Dig New Streams, will come out of those conversations that have been happening on TikTok. So yeah, and Instagram less so, but there as well.
Nice. All right. Well, check out Dave on TikTok. Check out his podcast. Always having interesting conversations. His most recent podcast was actually recorded in the woods.
Yeah.
So did you guys have like a lapel mics? How did you pull off a on-site podcast? Oh, you actually took the mic. You rolled out there with the whole setup. Did you bring a standing desk with you too into the woods?
I have such a simple setup. I've got my laptop, I've got this mic, and that's it.
I mean,
and we just like
I have a simple setup too.
And we just used what did we do? We did Zoom for video. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it worked.
All right. So again, just a reminder, questions should look like Q colon. Poker Stiff. Hey, the most incredible road to Emmaus experience I had was at a bar smoking cigars and drinking scotch with Dr. Alex G as he opened up Word and Sacrament. That's amazing. That sounds good. I'm all about that sacrament right there.
That does sound good.
So Dave, you and I had a quick conversation earlier in the day because we're big planners, the two of us. And so we had a conversation about a couple things that we thought would be great for us to be able to have a conversation around. One of the ones that you had brought up is Dave Capozzi did the Blair Witch yes, his nose was running the whole time. It was tough to watch. It was really tough to watch. And he gets so panicked. I don't know. But one of the things, Dave, you wanted to talk about was how to have conversations with biblical literalists, right?
I'm already getting hot.
Is that? I mean, Dave, it's a family show.
It is. Sorry.
So I thought we would start the conversation with a couple memes from biblical literalism. So the Naked Pastor, who I absolutely love their comics strips or whatever they are, this is one of them here. I absolutely adore this. This one I find to be hysterical. Okay, so biblical literalism. How would you describe it, Dave? Maybe start there. Let's talk about it for a minute. How would you define biblical literalism?
Okay, I would describe it more as an experience than an actual way that I can define it according to some kind of dictionary. I would say that my experience of biblical literalism is that the Bible, as presented to us in this book that contains the Hebrew Bible and the Christian scriptures, has allegory and poems and all that other sort of stuff. And someone that would be a biblical literalist would not read things that might be quite obviously allegory within the Hebrew language or the Greek language. They would read them as actual an event that happened. So you take that thing and you apply it literally. So the best example would be the creation story or the flood, right? So someone that says, no, it's 6 days. God created in 6 days. That the Bible says it. I believe it. That does it. That's kind of
Yeah.
the biblical literalist thing in my mind. How about you?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that when people would say that, do you take the Bible literally? Um, they're they're not acknowledging the different genres of the text. And
Yeah.
by not acknowledging the different genres of the text and kind of doing a overlay or a perspective of the text that is uh, much more scientific and historical, and so their desire is for the Bible to be science, or history, and that these are truths as it is written, not
Right.
truths as it is understood. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
written versus understood, because, like, I would say I find the Garden of Eden to be true,
Yeah.
but not historical and not
Yeah.
scientific.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. All right,
Yeah. That that sounds right for me.
you ready for the next meme?
Yeah. Then. Yeah.
Oops, here we go. Ready? I like this one. Literalists, when your disciples take every word you say as the message of God, it might not be wise to talk in metaphorical, metaphysical, or any other meta language. So when Jesus says, "Eat my flesh and drink my blood," uh,
It's good. It's good.
that's so terrible and hilarious all at once.
Oh wow. Wow.
All right, you ready for the next one?
I love this.
Everyone's a biblical literalist until Jesus says, with no irony, that sex workers are more accurate an image of the kingdom of God than obscenely rich people will ever be. Yeah,
There
this
it
is
is.
where, and the irony, in my opinion, even though it says with no irony, the irony, in my opinion, is this is a moment that is, I would argue, is literal. This isn't metaphorical. This is Jesus saying these people who are in these places and of these positions and postures in the world are actually more accurate to understanding the kingdom of God. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Something comes to me a little bit that I think people that are biblical literalists are often self-described biblical literalists. That there's like a virtue to it that you accept all of it as truth, the way that they
yeah.
would describe, right? True. Um, and the way that you talked about truth according to the garden might be a little bit different than they say it. But it's a kind of it's a it's a kind of badge of honor. But
That's amazing,
if you
Franklin.
what happened?
Sorry. Franklin said that's a
Oh, is it
tweet by his friend. That's
like
fantastic.
originally? That's
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
that's
Okay.
so fantastic. Sorry, apologize.
No, no. I think that they take as much of the Bible literally as maybe anyone else does.
Uh,
It's just whatever fits within the worldview, the preconceived worldview.
yeah, I don't disagree with that, folks. While we're kind of laughing at some of these memes, if you have questions about biblical literalism or questions about, because one of the things we want to talk about is how do you have conversations that are meaningful, valuable, and maybe even move things forward
Yeah.
with folks who hold a view of the Bible being literal and not taking into account genre, etc. So, anyhow, I have a couple more. Uh,
Woohoo.
Biblical literalism, getting science wrong for over 2,800 years.
Oh, it's a phenomenal picture.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean the fact that there's still flat earthers to me is phenomenal.
It
Um
is.
uh yes, Amanda. The best is that now literal means figurative. So I guess people who are literalist are also figurativists because
Figurativist.
they're they're they're
I like that.
yeah. All right, I only have one more, but this one I think is so great. It's a little wordy, so it's not the best meme since it's a little wordy. But 5 easy steps to reading the Bible literally. Study Koine Greek a lot, like until you're so fluent, people who spoke the language 2,000 years ago would think you're a native. Number two, same for Hebrew, only now you need to convince people who lived 3,000 years ago. Three, add Aramaic to your list of classes. Four, now study 3,000-year-old ancient cultures, religions, politics, economics, geography, biology, zoology of a region stretching from the headwaters of the Nile to the Fertile Crescent. Number five, then do the same for all areas encompassed by the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago, the entire north coast of Africa, the Iberian Peninsula, Southern Europe, and all of what is known as the Middle East. If you follow these 5 easy steps, you too can read the Bible literally. Maybe.
Maybe.
I absolutely love I love that one because I think it just kind of really gets to the point, right? That a lot of times people who are literalists um, don't actually have any depth of knowledge or education on the culture, the setting, the language, and they're really just pulling from an English translation. It seems relatively often that that English translation uh, is also uh, King James version. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like if someone says that they are a king that they prefer the KJV, the odds are that that person is probably going to be a literalist.
Yeah. Not just prefer. You can't just
Yes.
prefer it. You gotta. It's the only one.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
So so what do you think, Dave, when so hold on one second. I want to let's see. I just got this sent to me. Oh, I
Oh,
can't
sweet.
quite see it. Let's see. I'll try it. I'll do this.
Oh, sweet.
Uh, man, I am like struggling
Oh,
here. Hold on. I got it. I
that's a.
promise.
It's a great scene from West Wing, right?
Oh, I love West Wing so much. Uh, I'm struggling here, folks. I can't find it. It was oh, there it is. All right. I swear I know how to bah. All right. I'll figure it out and put it up at some point. But so Dave, what when you because you're the one that kind of brought this question, what
Yeah.
is it about conversations with folks who are take the Bible as in a literal sense? What is it that makes those conversations complicated, that the idea of like trying to help people have a process of approaching people being important? Does that make sense?
Yes. So some of the experiences that make this sort of put this at the top of my mind are conversations that I've had with people. What does that say? In fear of being, if one part is untrue, the whole book loses credibility. Yeah. So yeah. So but there's also another complication to it. So for instance, let's take the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Um, the person that I was most recently talking to about it was saying how in the New Testament there's a particular this is what it means. It's just assumed this is, it's addressing homosexuality. Well, I was like, well, Ezekiel never says that, and Ezekiel talks about Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right.
And then Jesus addresses Sodom and Gomorrah and says it's going to be worse on the day of judgment for these places that didn't welcome,
Yep.
the Messiah.
Yep.
So it might have something to do with welcome, right? And these other things that Ezekiel says. And so as soon as we went to the Ezekiel passage and started talking and just read that, they were like, yeah, but, and then went to refute it with a New Testament passage.
Okay.
And I guess for me, the challenge is I want to have a good faith conversation. I have no vested interest in what the Bible says. None. It doesn't determine for me that this is what I'm going to end up believing. It's just I'm trying to say, what is it actually conveying, maybe on the whole, because there are contradictions as we, but it seems to be that this story is not conveying what you think it's conveying. So let's be honest about it. That couldn't happen. And so my challenge was, how do I make it so that I can at least maybe, for lack of a better, metaphor, plant a seed or have a conversation that someone feels like they're seen or heard, or that I'm being in good faith, because I genuinely am trying to move people because I believe it says something other than what they think it says. And it would help them to be more compassionate towards people in the LGBTQ plus community. So I guess I just wonder what better approach I could take than using scripture to argue against a biblical literalist, because that's what I thought might work.
Yeah. For me, I've had this conversation so many times. And excuse me. And I've also had this conversation with people that I think probably didn't think they were biblical literalist, but when I started asking questions, they had a lot stronger attachment to some passages than they first perceived.
Yeah.
I find that one of the easiest ways to discuss the text to someone who is a literalist is to talk about this idea that we can differentiate truth from history, that something can be true and not be historical. And when people are like, and I can say, can you think of an example that we would both agree upon in the Bible that is true, but it's not historical?
Yeah.
And, oftentimes they, kind of hem and haw. And for me, so I'll often point to like the prodigal son or the good neighbor, right? The Samaritan story, right? And say, we have hospitals called Good Samaritan. We have all of these nonprofit organizations that are named after Samaritan's Purse, whatever, right? That story by Jesus. And I'll say, can we agree that Jesus just made that up? Like, those people in that story don't exist. That it was a story that Jesus made up. And to then talk about it and say, this is so true. The story of the good neighbor is one of the truest stories that we can talk about and discuss about what it means to be a neighbor and wrestle with this idea of mercy, compassion, and justice. And if we can agree that the story is true, but Jesus just made it up, and yet still see all of these different nonprofits, these organizations come out of this story and behave truthfully in this world, and even historically in this world, while the story is untrue, or the story is not historical. And if we can then agree that a story can be true without needing to be historical, then we can have conversations around things such as the Garden of Eden. Does it change anything if that story is true, but it's just not historical?
Yeah, right.
And I think that is a way that I have found that at least breaks through that first barrier.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily get us to the finish line, but at least breaks us through to that first barrier, because the parables of Jesus are so profound and so significant for understanding faith, understanding humanity, understanding God, even, that we can call all of those things true,
Mm.
even though there was no beat man, there was no Levite, there was no Samaritan. It was just a fictional story that Jesus made up to communicate a very deep and powerful truth.
Right.
So that's
Yeah, I
that's
like that.
that's one of the ways that I think I've come to begin to be able to address some of this. So I know. Let me see here. I think there was a question here. Do you have any thoughts about that while I look up some questions?
I guess I just wonder if you found it effective.
I find it effective to begin the conversation, right? And if the
Okay.
person doesn't want to continue, in fact, I think Ray, at one point, let me see if I can find it real quick. Um, Ray in the chat said something that I think is kind of the next step of this. And I know some folks had some questions, so forgive me that I'm not getting to all the questions yet. The fear being, if one part is untrue, the whole book loses credibility. And this is where
Mm.
I think it's really important to focus on. It is true. It's true. It's just not historical. And so we can maintain truth without historicity. Um, in fact, most of us, our memories of our childhood are not historical,
Right.
right? Like
None of
we
us. Yeah.
we we've added we've added people into parts of the story that weren't even present at that birthday party when you were 5 that you so clearly remember. We've added things where we think we were at the store when this conversation happened, and the parent will be like, we definitely were not at the store during that time, right? And
Mm.
so our memories often aren't even historical, which is okay, um, but they're true. And so I
Yes.
find that
Right.
that is a helpful way for us to kind of at least begin to broach or breach that divide.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I get that. I get that fear that if one, I understand it. I've been there. I've understood that fear.
yeah, because you
Um,
become unmoored, like you don't,
yeah.
you're not anchored to anything anymore, or it feels that way.
Right. 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 And ultimately, sometimes I don't think I carry enough compassion to the conversations where I'm like, I'm not trying to disrupt the thing that makes you feel safe in life. I don't want to do that.
Exactly.
What I would like to do though is expand your capacity to see more truth in it. Maybe that's
Yes.
an angle. Yeah.
All right. Here's one of our questions. What are portions of the text that you believe can be taken literally, if any? Again,
Like
I think,
historically true. Is that what we're talking about?
yeah, I think that's, I'm
Yeah.
guessing Fifth Sunday. You can clarify if that's what you mean, but I'm assuming that there's a historicity, not just a truthfulness to it. My question, I guess my question is, what do we need to be historically true
Yeah.
in order for it to be true? And I get that that's a complicated question for a lot of people who have never considered that possibility, right? Um, because then immediately people are going, so are you saying the resurrection isn't true? Are you saying that? And
There it
so
is.
I would say for myself, Dominic Crossan is an amazing scholar who does not hold to the resurrection.
Hmm.
Um, but his writings are phenomenal, and his understandings of Jesus and the world. And he would identify himself as a Christian, but he doesn't believe that the resurrection physically happened. I, on the other hand, for some reason, still hold that to be true. I also still hold to be true that Jesus is God incarnate. Um, and that is just something that rings true to my soul, that connects deeply with me. But I would argue, is it something that is necessary in order for the truth of resurrection to be true? without it being having to be historical. And this becomes really, really complicated because usually a person who is a literalist has never had to even think through a morsel of this. And now you've opened up this can of worms
Yeah.
that's everything.
Right.
Any
It's
thoughts?
true. Yeah. Well, I see Ray asked if Moses is part of the Red Sea. I think it's a similar thing. Well, were were the Israelites even ever enslaved in Egypt? Is a
Right.
question.
Yep.
Um, I think what I appreciate about what you're saying, Don, while I'm not someone who affirms the things that you've just affirmed,
Mhm.
um, I can see the value in them. I can see why it's meaningful, impactful, beautiful, even. Um, I I think that it's also not necessary for me to affirm those things in order for us to be considered like walking the same path in faith.
Right.
Um, because for me, the pursuit of I guess mercy, humility, and justice like is a bigger pursuit than I affirm this one thing that happened 2,000 years ago that no one can prove or disprove.
Right. And this is where it's so complicated because I'm definitely not a biblical literalist.
Right.
Um, but I'm so attached to the text,
Yeah.
right? The scripture makes my bones burst. I get excited reading about scripture. I get excited talking about scripture. But for me, it's the power of the story that is true beyond anything I've experienced or I've understood about the world. Even resurrection, right? Like this idea that empire, the only power empire has over humanity is its ability to wipe it out.
Yeah.
That's it. Make it
Yeah.
suffer and kill it.
Right.
And then we're reading this story of this individual who empire throws its haymaker. It throws its best shot. It winds up and lands a hit on the chin of Jesus.
Yeah.
And Jesus shakes it off and climbs out of the grave and walks away.
Yeah.
Right? So to me, whether that is cinematic or literal, it's awesome.
Right. I
Right?
totally agree. Totally
Like
agree.
it's so spectacular and so beautifully told and so engaging to my soul.
Yeah.
Now, for me, I happen to believe that it's literal in that
Yeah.
sense. I believe
Yeah.
that Jesus resurrected from the dead and all of that. But I would argue that someone who just saw the beauty of empire throwing its best punch and not being, I mean, Pharaoh does the same thing. Pharaoh throws Pharaoh's best punch, wiping out all the people, all the male babies. And Moses goes floating by in a basket, and his own daughter undermines him and brings about the salvation of Israel by rescuing someone from the very thing that was meant to be his demise.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
go, that's so good. Such powerful storytelling, such amazing ways to think about these things.
Right.
And so for me, it's more important the truthfulness there, right?
Yeah.
Than it is about whether it was historical.
I this is really good because one of the things that's coming to me right now is this. I love that you brought in empire. Is empire like the word that people take shots to? Is that what's happening Fifth
I,
Sunday? Um, um, so
I just spilled my drink.
I guess when I think about the Hebrew Bible and the Christian scriptures, I think about liberation stories.
Yes.
Liberation stories, particularly of people who needed liberation, not some kind of like um, I'm a sinner and I need to be saved from myself.
Correct.
Um, and the conversation about truth and belief gets in the way of the deeper liberation meaning. I think it has convoluted the power of these stories the way that you talk about them, Don. And I appreciate that reminder that these are like conversations about the underside and what they do to overcome powerful empires that oppress
Yeah.
those pesky daughters.
Oh, there's so much good conversation going on in the chat.
Oh,
Um,
beautiful.
let's catch up on some of the uh,
Yeah.
on the conversations. I think what us easy can be what also does the most harm. I think lines would be what most affirms people living into the truest image of God in their way. What is most loving and merciful and just. Laughable and oftentimes infuriating, frustrating part of literalists is they pick, choose what they will or won't be literal about to fit into their own. Yeah, I think that's honestly
That's
when I talk to someone who is a literalist and I say, "Oh, you don't eat ham. You gave up bacon cheeseburgers." Oh, like literalists do not give up bacon. In fact, literalists are the biggest consumption of pork there is on the planet. And then it's like, oh well, that's the Old Testament. It's like, well, but yeah, I agree with that. For me, learning there are Christians who believe the Genesis account is poetry as opposed to historical, like the Book of Revelation. Some Christians believe in amillennialism, postmillennialism, or as I have come to believe is panmillennialism, which is it will all pan out in the end.
Yeah, yeah. I like that.
I think the issue is denominations preach they have all the answers as opposed to preaching they are many theological beliefs. Ray, I think this is such an important point.
No.
We have like one of my favorite rabbinic, it's almost a throwaway statement. I forget where it is because it's not the point of the passage in the Mishnah. But the rabbi basically says there's 100,000 Jews, therefore there's 100,000 interpretations.
Yeah.
I love that. And we should embrace that because what that does is it allows us to bring it to the table and have these amazing conversations about imagery, about impact, about truthfulness. And it's so significant.
I I love that, Don. I think that there would be no need for an exvangelical movement if that's the way that we embraced Christian faith.
Preach. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Part of it, what though, part of it is the was a time in early discussion discipleship where Don said, if I tell you what I believe about this, it might change your opinion about me, not about the issue.
Mm,
But because I respected him so much by observing his behavior and love for people and children, I knew I would respect his opinion. Not that I was a literalist, but it was a hot topic conversation. Yeah. So yeah, part of it is relationship. Part of the way that we have
for
these
sure.
conversations is through relationship.
Always, yeah.
And I think what we've done is unfortunately we've made relationship the hardest part of Christianity, right? Because we're always evaluating each other and we're always evaluating ourselves in front of each other. And so what we've done is we've forced each other to don these masks, not be willing to share doubts because as you were mentioning, evangelicalism really eliminated doubts and it made it about certitude. And I think Ray has also kind of pointed out with denominational saying we have the truth. And so the moment you have this kind of atmosphere where we all have to have it completely together,
Yeah.
like I think Christianity is the original Instagram, right? Like you show up on Sunday morning and you have to have your life together for people
mm,
to so they can appreciate and be jealous of how the Sheevers have it all figured out. Um,
yes.
and so
That's good.
we have all this going on, and so we have been taught instead of being authentic and sharing our doubts, sharing our questions, sharing our disagreements. Instead, we've just been taught to be bobbleheads, and we're just like,
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I love that Christianity's the original Instagram. It makes me think though, Don, this video from when you were on my podcast has got some traction on Instagram.
Yes, it has. It
There
takes
are quite a
every
few.
ounce of my being not to respond to comments.
I can't get enough of it. Sorry. I behave a little bit differently on Instagram than I do TikTok. I'm a lot more generous on TikTok because I don't have trolls on TikTok, but I
Yeah.
have them on Instagram. Not just that, I attract a very conservative audience for some reason, and they are very offended by this statement that you made about Christianity being a religion of thoughts and prayers, and it should be hands and feet, essentially. And
Yes.
I can't for the life of me understand why they're offended, because you're not critiquing Jesus. You're not going after Jesus or God. You're talking about an institution.
Yeah.
And people think for some reason that you're getting at the core of who they are and what they stand for, what they believe in. It is
Yeah.
wild to see. It's wild to see.
Well, I think they're also probably not listening to the whole podcast where I'm clearly a Christian and a
Right.
pastor who is affirming the faith and just saying I'm disappointed at what it's become
I
as
know. It's
opposed to what
amazing.
it should be. But yeah, it's up until recently, for some reason, Genesis 4 or Genesis 5, I've been doing these 1 minute clips
Yeah.
of what each passage, each chapter means. And
Yeah.
for some reason, those have eclipsed all of our other shorts we've done. I have no idea why.
That's awesome.
Everyone wants to know about Genesis 4 for some reason.
Oh, I
Um,
wonder.
but before that, it was Tana said, is hell, does hell exist?
That's the one.
And
That's the one.
it really caught up huge. Now, the one that hasn't taken off, that I'm sure just hasn't hit the algorithm right, that I was
Yeah.
really expecting to get trashed over, was Tana asked me, "Is Jesus perfect?"
That
And
one.
I said,
Yeah. Right.
no. Um, I said Jesus is righteous according to the law, but he probably was a pain in the butt as a kid,
Yeah.
and he probably was a smart aleck as a high school kid. Like, yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
if the resurrection is not historically factual and still can be truth, does that mean that just a story allegory of Christ being nailed to cross be true, even if it literally did not happen? So if I'm understanding you correctly, Poker Stiff, I would say that it's not a stretch for us to imagine that Rome took a dissident who was trying to empower the oppressed people, that they would
Right.
nail them to the cross, torture them, and kill them and mock them. That's
Right.
not a
Right.
stretch.
Right.
And so I would say that, again, even though I hold that to be true personally, I could see someone coming to that conclusion that this is an important way of understanding our faith, but they don't think it literally happened. Um, I think we have enough historical references from Josephus and some other things to, one, say Jesus was a historical figure.
Yeah.
And also we have enough understanding from, again, Josephus and some other historians of that time, that many people's lives ended tragically at the hands of Rome, who were following the teachings of this Jesus of Nazareth.
Right. Right. I think this hits on something that typically bothers me on the other side. So biblical literalists are one challenge. People who challenge things about Jesus, his historical relevance, whether or not he lived, also is bothersome to me because I'm like, but I know where it comes from. I think that religion, especially Christianity in the West, has done so much damage that people need it to be completely false. They need
I
it to be
agree.
completely mythical. I think we do better we serve ourselves better to be honest, and that it's likely that Jesus existed. It's likely that we would have thought pretty highly of him as a revolutionary in some circumstances, maybe depending on how you think about the world, but someone that was definitely lynched by the state. And I have no trouble believing that. In fact, I think that's probably historically accurate.
Yeah. All right. How do you manage the concern that the differentiation between truth and historical might negatively affect people altogether because they are not thinking about it as deeply? What do you think, Dave?
Um, the concern that there's a differentiation between historical and I think I don't know about the concern. I think that if from my own experience, it is agonizing to lose the certainty that I grew up with. And I think what Don's message and what we're talking about is helpful to slowly walk someone through the ability to think with more curiosity, with more faith, even with in a way that involves wonder and a lack of certainty that might just leave room for the possibility of something miraculous or beautiful. Um, I think that invitation, maybe talking about it more as an invitation than a you're wrong, you're bad, this is wrong, this is bad. I would love to move away from those kinds of conversations.
Absolutely.
I I just don't find them helpful.
Yeah, and I also find that there's some people that maybe are literalists that I just don't even push back on them
Yeah. Yeah.
because they're not in a place causing harm to anyone.
Yeah.
They have this kind of sweet view of the text and of God, and but they're not actively harming other people. And with that, I don't need to unseat someone's faith.
Right.
Now, it is interesting when people come at me swinging with some of this stuff and I like start pushing back a little bit at different things. And then they get really mad. And it's like, I was just sitting here minding my own. I was at a birthday party for a friend's daughter. She was turning 3 or 4.
Oh.
And his uncle comes over, sits down next to me and says, "So you're a pastor?" And I was like, "Oh boy."
Yep.
And I was
There it
like,
is.
"Yep." And he's like, "Of a Bible teaching church?" And I was like, "Yep, the entire thing actually." And and he's like and then he just started diving in on me, and I and there was like it was like sharks swimming around me of like other people coming in wanting to listen to this kind of cat fight.
Yes.
And in that setting, I dismantled the person's arguments,
Of course.
and I may have said that their understanding of the Bible was quaint.
Wait, wait, wait,
I know,
wait,
right?
wait.
Yep, yep. I knew
Before you
quaint.
move,
I knew quaint was gonna trigger a memory for you. All right, go ahead, Dave. Share your quaint memory.
oh, Don, hold on. This has been for so. First of all, I don't want to forget where you're going, but why is that you
I could
called?
tell you
Please remind me because that's like the greatest thing.
because we were sitting at, again, horribly named ashram
Yes.
event, and somehow I ended up with a group of people sitting around me at this table asking me the most random freaking questions.
Yep.
And someone asked me, I believe it was Mike, about Mike Breen
There it is.
and his book on discipleship.
There it
And
is.
I
Yeah.
said, I think it's a quaint understanding of discipleship, which to me did not feel at all controversial to say because
Oh,
I was like, what's wrong with quaint? There's quaint cottages that are nice. I would love to have a
I
quaint cottage near the beach.
I
Um,
think that was the moment. That was the moment where I was like, I have to be next to this guy wherever he is.
yeah, I just remember the whole table exploding when I
Yeah, it
referred
was
to it
amazing.
as being quaint.
Well, it was
I
such a major thing happening in evangelicalism that at that moment. So
Yeah,
for you to say it, it was pretty epic. Epic.
yeah, and it was relatively innocent. I didn't mean it in a terrible way. I just meant that it wasn't as deep and broad and as wide as what I believed discipleship to be. And so
Absolutely.
to me, the opposite of that is quaint.
I've completely forgot, and I
Yeah.
thank you for that reminder.
Y-
It's so good.
You're welcome. So
Thank you.
anyhow, typically when someone comes at me and wants to, like, they want to prove a point to me about the text, that's about the only time I at times and not had that wisdom to just kind of let people be. But as I've gotten older, as long as there's no harm happening, whether I see the harm in themselves and the way they treat themselves, like, I'll call that out probably the most quickly. If
Mm,
I see someone living a life of shame and guilt and personally oppressing themselves from their understanding of the text, I will I will gently attempt to navigate those waters with that person. Or if
nice.
someone just comes in swinging, wanting to own me, um, then I will be happy to oblige the conversation.
Which I've been around a few times and I've loved every time.
Yeah, uh, yeah. I have nothing. All right, so we only have about 15 minutes left with you because you got to go at 9. So I
Yes.
do want to, before we completely move on, or before you have to leave, talk about another topic. And let's see. And so that is this idea of mass shootings.
Hmm.
And um, for me, I think it's, yeah. I just want to hear your thoughts. You teach an ethics course or civics course rather,
Civics, yeah.
and you said you just started talking about the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
So, how are you having conversations with teenagers, especially after things such as Club Q, the Walmart that just happened, the 4 Idaho students? I know that was a stabbing, but 4 Idaho students, the 3 Virginia football players, not Virginia Tech, Virginia football players. Just in the last couple weeks, we've had multiple mass murders.
Yeah.
How are you having that conversation?
Yeah. Um, so for context, I'm going through the Bill of Rights with these students. And so
Yeah.
we're talking about each amendment. And what I had them do after having kind of like a churchy moment with them of,
Hmm.
y'all, this is happening. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge it, leave space for, our school has a pretty high population of LGBTQ plus students. And so if they need to take space, which they can in our school, they can go into the hallway, they can check in with their counselor. It's a beautiful thing. So leaving room for that, leaving room for silence, leaving room for grieving. And then what I've had them do is to compare our gun laws compared to our um, violent crime rates, comparing them to other countries that are similar to ours, democracies. And so they've done this major study over the last week. Now, these students are pretty unsurprisingly confused, right? They're like,
I think most
why?
adults are.
Right? Why don't we do something? Why don't we do something meaningful in terms of prohibiting this from happening? Why can't we stop this from happening? Whereas other countries seem to be able to stop it from happening. They are very confused, and unfortunately, and I think what I'm noticing that has been surprising to me is they're not as phased as I would expect them to be.
Mm.
They have come to expect it in a way that is so scary. Um, it's just like, yeah, there was another one, and no one's like, oh, how awful. They're just like, yeah, there was another one. They just come to expect it. This is America, right? This
Yeah.
is what we do, and we're not about to go after the gun lobbies. We're not about to do anything meaningful the way that maybe Canada has tried to do, or the UK has tried to do, or Scotland after mass shootings. Um, and I think what I'm trying to invite them into is critical thinking. Like you, as your style, I never they continually ask me what I think about something. I never offer that up, but I will make sure there's space to care for one another when there's a difficult time like that. Um, uh, Without fail, they come down on the side of they're not against gun ownership. They just feel like there needs to be some very reasonable changes um, to the way that we allow people to have access to things that maybe they shouldn't have access to. And also, really, what it comes down to for them is they associate, and this is where it comes down to faith. They associate that hatred with Christianity.
Yes.
So they associate, before anything was said, before any of the conversations about what the shooter, all the assumptions were what, obviously this was a Christian that hates gay people,
Right.
um, without question. And so that was the other interesting part to me. So yeah, obviously they're against, um, they don't like gun ownership the way we have it, and they think Christianity is responsible for it.
Yeah. I really wonder how different the U.S. would be if we cared way more about the 14th Amendment than the Second Amendment, without a doubt. You know, it is a complicated thing, because I think about growing up. I was born in the mid 70s, and growing up, there were guns. I didn't
Yeah.
think anything of it. No one thought anything of it. It wasn't an issue, because people were not typically, outside of something like Kent State, people were not typically going out and
Right.
using them in a manner that was violent, outside of crimes gone wrong, quote unquote.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I find it to be a complicated relationship, right? I have no interest in owning a gun. I don't have a need. I don't perceive a need for me to have a gun.
Yeah.
I also am somewhat ambivalent about an argument to outlaw all guns. I just don't. Do I think that the world would be better if there were not guns at all? Yes.
Yeah.
Do I believe that some people would be harmed greater in certain countries if they were unarmed and their government was armed? Yes.
Right. Right.
Do I believe that our fetishizing of weaponry and power um, has created harm and created an atmosphere where people go and do these horrible things? Yes. Do I think it has to do with hypermasculinity and toxic masculinity? Absolutely. Otherwise, we would see a lot more women committing these crimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do I believe it is something about fear mongering in our culture and the perpetual state of othering of others that leads to it? Yes. Which is why it's a predominantly conservative problem. Again, I'm not saying it's only that, but it's predominantly that. And because fear is what drives a lot of the arguments in those settings.
Absolutely.
So I don't know what the answer is, because it's way more complicated and society's way more complicit than just weaponry.
Right. Absolutely.
Do I believe that some weaponry is completely unnecessary, and therefore why put it into the hands of someone who may be compromised with some of these other issues that makes them more apt to do something violent? Yes, I think
Mm.
that there should be some common sense laws.
Mm.
I think what's sad is one of the things you touched on is that I think most people would assume that the shooting at the Club Q, no one is going to be shocked to find out that that person was raised in a church. I don't know that they were, but no one would be shocked by it. In fact, I think people would be shocked if they found out that the murderer was uh, progressive,
Of course.
inclusive,
Of course.
um, atheist. Um,
Yeah.
they would be shocked by that. They
Yeah.
might not say it out loud, but I think it would be atypical for that person, for that to be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you see the interview with his father?
Oh my gosh, it was so toxic.
Yeah, brutal,
Dad is just a heap of mess.
brutal,
um,
brutal.
because he was the more concerned that his son might be gay being at that gay bar than that he killed people.
Well, and I think
And
Don,
then the media cut those parts out.
I know, I know. I think Don, what we talked last time about. Oh, let me get this first. So many people wrap up certain things into their self identities: guns, politics, religion. People grabbing ideologies as their personalities and image. How do we nurture people toward a whole and holier way of being? This is exactly what I was just gonna say. This kind of ties back to the biblical conversation in the sense that last week we talked about pacifism,
Mm.
or a few weeks ago,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Yep.
And so one of the things that I came to when I was in seminary was, man, Jesus seems to be about nonviolent, like active resistance. Like he's not raising like physical violence as an option for his mission. And what he's inviting his disciples into is a similar approach to do justice, right?
Yep.
And so I guess the invitation into a holier way of being, Amanda, would be if you're, talking to someone who considers themselves to be a Christian, and often those people will be more conservative in a lot of our circles. Um, Maybe ask some questions about what they think that Jesus might have to say about these things, about, not necessarily about the conversation around LGBTQ plus people, because they're very clear about what they think about that. That feels like a ship that's a little bit harder to move. But the gun one is actually easier for evangelicals, reasonable biblical evangelicals, than the LGBTQ plus conversation. And not saying that we should prioritize one over the other, but if you're having a conversation with someone about gun ownership, you can have a conversation with them about Jesus and discipleship in a way that you can't necessarily when it comes to gay marriage.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because for them, that part feels clear.
Yes, for sure.
Especially in their literalist, to tie it back to that. But gun ownership, Jesus tells Peter to put away his sword.
Well, and one last thing before I skedaddle,
yep.
the thing about the Christian worldview that I think is beautiful, really beautiful, is this like living as though the kingdom of heaven is here and now, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're doing that, then having the capacity to end life and wanting more of that is the opposite of this life-giving, justice-producing way that we're supposed to be living now. And I think that even the most conservative evangelicals that I've talked to can get behind that vision, that peaceable kingdom that is about, everything being made right, in a way that, again, doesn't work with the LGBTQ plus conversation, but
right.
could work with this one.
Well, Dave, I'm super grateful for you being on.
As am I.
And I want to ask, will you be on again before Christmas?
Yes. I mean, I said that I will come on Mondays, and
perfect.
you know what, Don?
Yes.
Just, I am hoping that Santa gets me a new computer so that I don't produce lag and any issues. So I'm hoping that happens soon.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how if Santa brings you a quaint computer or not. But
I've got a quaint one now. That's the problem.
That's the problem. So I do want to say that I want us to have a conversation about post-church, post-evangelical Christmas, and the holidays, and how to have holidays well with people in our circles who aren't either in the same place as us in processing these things or deconstructing our faith and how we do that well with each other.
I love
So I
that.
want to make sure that we get a chance to do that. So I'm really excited. Dave, thank you so much for being on. I
Thank
love
you.
you.
And
I care
I
so
love,
deeply about you.
likewise, man. And I love this chat. You guys are the best. Have fun. See you later, my friend.
All right, we'll see you, Dave.
Peace.
Bye. All right. Well, Dave is just absolutely one of my favorite human beings. So it was a ton of fun. Dave is going to be on most Mondays, if not every Monday, and I'm super excited about that. And so, what I'd really like for us to do with Mondays is come up with some conversation pieces that we can have around some of these discussions and these ideas of what does post church, Dave being post church, me being post evangelical, but still wanting and desiring to be a part of the church. What are some topics that we can talk about to kind of learn how to communicate well with each other, how to celebrate where each other is on the journey of life and faith. And so I just encourage you, whether it's on our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, whatever, that maybe you share with us some of the topics you would like for us to be discussing on Monday nights. So I really, really look forward to that. Christmas is a big birthday party for Jesus. Um, yes, sure. uh, I, yes, his or his laugh is infectious. Yeah, Dave is such a sweet human being. I've known him for so long and have had so many good laughs with him. And I think the thing that is also wonderful about the potential of this conversation is inviting people into it that are both not religious. And so, even if they've never been religious, to get to hear two people, myself and Dave, and other people asking questions and hearing people that are different places in their understanding of God and faith having meaningful, beautiful conversations. And I think that there's so much value to that, and it's so important for our world to see. Um, so I hope that you all want to be a part of that. Subscribe, hit the bell, and to ensure that you get notified when we go live. Give our video a thumbs up so it gets sent out by the YouTube algorithm to more people. Um, I'll have an interesting story for that Christmas convo with Dave. All right, I can't wait. The Christian right says they are pro life. The entire Bible Belt is pro life, but they are all pro capital punishment, radically pro Second Amendment, and anti life when it comes to LGBTQA. Yeah, I think that that's a major complication. I want to be fair here. So, Poker Stiff, I certainly agree with that statement. It's more so I would argue that it feels as though um, people who are more conservative in their Christian expression and their political views tend to be more pro birth than they are pro life. And I think that's an important distinction. But I'd also say that in my experience, in my journey throughout, um, my life and my faith, and having the opportunity to have so many conversations with so many different Christians in different places, that the one thing that I have noticed is that people of faith really struggle to have a consistent hermeneutic. And what I mean by that is a consistent interpretation of scripture. We all tend to bend our hermeneutic to what we are either naturally bent towards or good at or desire, and then give ourselves a generous hermeneutic around the things that we wrestle with and are not compelled by um, upfront. And I think the one thing that is missing from most of us in order to have a truly, genuinely beautiful, healthy um, life of faithfulness, both to the way we treat ourselves and the way we treat each other, is a consistent hermeneutic that is reflective and self-reflective about the way we think about ourselves, the way we think about others, and the way we interact. I think the more we can move ourselves to that, the more likely we are to live a healthier life, and therefore healthier emotionally for ourselves and for those that we impact. So we have a few more minutes, folks. Feel free to throw any questions in the chat. Let me just do a quick survey here and see if I've missed any. There's a good chance I have. Let's see. No, I think we got all the questions. We didn't have too many specific questions. So let me just scroll through the chat here to make sure I didn't miss anything. I really appreciate all the interaction you guys have put in the chat and brought questions. It's been so good. I just absolutely enjoy Mondays and Thursdays with all of you. Oh, I missed this. Mid-70s. Come on, dude. I can count. Look, Fifth Sunday, it was mid-70s. I mean, it was slightly earlier than mid-70s, but I don't feel comfortable saying it was early 70s. There's a really good cartoon by the South Park guys in the middle of Bowling for Columbine. Oh man, I watched that movie. That was what Michael Moore, I think, wrote that. Boy, it's been a long time since I've seen that. How much Yingling is left? You hear that? Like a sip. All right. Any other questions? If not, we'll call it a night. Oh, question. Thanks, Ray. Don, do y'all observe Advent and or the Christian calendar? So that's actually a tough question for me, Ray, because I've ebbed and flowed over the years. I find, how do I want to answer that? The literal answer, the short, succinct answer is yes and no. Advent, to me, in the way that it has been celebrated by the church for centuries, is nice. I don't personally find it compelling. And I literally just mean personally, which makes it really complicated as the pastor, right? If you're the pastor and you're the one that's supposed to be teaching and you're supposed to be presenting all these things, to not be all that passionate about it makes it complicated. Because, for me, being a student of history, being a student of Jewish tradition, etc., the one thing, and we just recorded a podcast on this, you'll have to check it out, Ray. It'll be coming out in the next couple of weeks. But the one thing we know for a fact is that Jesus was not born in December. We've narrowed it down to 11 months. The only one we've pretty much eliminated as being a possibility is December. So because of that and some of the other things that I've just come to learn about the likelihood of when Jesus was born and the impact and the beauty of that, based in the Jewish calendar, has made me less attracted to the Jesus in a manger picture of Christmas. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I don't have an issue with that Christians celebrate it. I don't have an issue that Christians do Advent. It just has kind of lost a little bit of its glimmer, right, for me. And because of that, I'm willing to do Advent. So like at our church, if the community wants to do Advent, I'll 100% do Advent. If the church wants to have 4 weeks of discussion leading into December 25th, and all of them focus on the different things of joy and love and all that, Absolutely. I just don't think that those are topics that are ever an issue to talk about, and they're beautiful and good and rich. Me personally, I find the Jewish calendar way more compelling. And that's just me personally. And this is such a hard thing, and I feel like I was kind of hesitant to answer, Ray, because I don't ever want somebody else to hear me say that and think that it would be me dismissing the beauty of the Christian calendar for so many people that are a part of this faith. I'm really thrilled that people have Lent and people have Advent and people have um, Easter, right? For me, Passover, when Passover comes around, that is my time that I really reflect on the death and resurrection of Jesus. Easter, I know that that is a time that the majority of Christianity reflects on the death and resurrection of Jesus, and that's okay. But the beauty of the tying of the imagery to Passover is so powerful and palpable to me that I'm just drawn to it. And so, therefore, those are what I tend to really dive into and get excited about and am moved by. Um, and so, Christmas, Easter, those times of years, especially if Easter doesn't align very well with Passover, um, it's a little bit more complicated for me. I don't mind teaching on it. I don't mind celebrating it. It's just not, if I wasn't a part of a church, if I wasn't a pastor, I wouldn't personally celebrate those things at those times. But I have no issue with it. I hope that made sense. I hope that answered it clearly and doesn't cause any confusion, because unfortunately, stuff like that can often cause confusion for folks, and I don't mean it to. Um, so frustrating how the convo concerning LGBTQA plus brothers and sisters seems to be the most divisive in the church, even just a convo of loving them. Yeah, I agree. I don't understand the complication there. I mean, I understand, like, to say I don't understand isn't quite fair. I know the reasoning. I don't understand how we arrived at that reasoning with everything else we know about God and we know about faith. I don't understand why we landed there. It's more likely it was during one of the festivals. As I understand it, the most popular guess is September, October. Yeah. A lot of people also say April. That Jesus, there's people that say that Jesus was born during Sukkot. There's other people that say he was born during Passover, um, and that the return will be during Sukkot. There's just lots of arguments for different things. Early on, Clementine or Clement, not Clementine, Clement said it was either December 21st or January 25th or January 6th. So there's lots of different things. I believe the Feast of Tabernacles is the leader in that race. I think either Feast of Tabernacles um, or Passover are probably the two that most people that want to think about Jesus's entire life and all the metrics and the key moments of Jesus's life being aligned with Jewish calendar would argue that he was either born at Passover or at Sukkot. Okay, now I got to change my profile picture and delete the music. I have no idea what that means, but yes. All right, folks. Any other questions? Ray, I hope that that was at least a decent. When was the census? Most likely. So this is a great question, by the way. So if you're not understanding what Ray is asking, is that Jesus comes back to Bethlehem because there was a census being held. Most people would argue that it made sense for Rome to do a census during one of the feasts in which the Israelites would have traveled back to their homeland, right? So that would have been Passover, that would have been Sukkot, and I think Pentecost would have been the three major feasts that the people would have come home. So the likelihood is that Rome, being a smart nation, would have done the census during one of those times when all of Israel in the diaspora would have been traveling back to Jerusalem, back to their land in order to celebrate these feasts. Um, so most likely, Ray, that's when it would have happened, which is why I think a lot of people land on the um, either Passover or on Sukkot. Um, there is something within ancient history, and I believe we can find it in Jewish history as well, where people die on the day they were born. And so that also helps people to kind of lean towards Passover as kind of a major option. And then Sukkot as the time that would be the time that the Messiah would return, because that would be the bringing in of the harvest. Um, so yeah, I think there's lots of really cool and fascinating things about it. I would probably say for the most part over the years, I personally have leaned towards Sukkot, but in more recent times in reading and studying, um, I find the Passover argument just as compelling. So I'm not sure when Jesus was born, other than it really was unlikely it was December 25th, which is okay. Um, I do also think it's interesting, though, that we don't see birthdays being celebrated of any of the other Jewish religious figures. Like, there's not a birthday of Moses celebration. There's not a birthday of David celebration. There's not a birthday of Abraham celebration. And I think that kind of leads us into a little bit of this is some of the more Gentile influence uh, on our faith, that we are celebrating the birth of someone. As a literalist, I'm disappointed the Bible doesn't provide an exact date. Right? It would be so much easier that way, but it would probably be like the first of Nissan, and not the car. So all right, folks. Any other questions? Ray, thank you. Those were great questions. I love having a conversation around uh, the Jewish festivals and how the church calendar. One of my favorite parts about the Christian calendar is the the time of common, or the place of commonplace time, or something like that. That's like kind of during the summers in between the different celebrations, and it's just a time of common, something of common time or era, or I don't remember. That's how much I love it, right? Don, thank you for doing this week in and week out. Absolutely. And Poker Stiff, I'm so excited when you're here. You ask such great questions and give meaningful insights. So love having you here. We really are fortunate. When David Gushy was on and did an interview a couple weeks ago, after we went off the broadcast and him and I were chatting for a couple minutes after the call, he was just like, he was so impressed with everyone, and the questions people were asking, and the thoughtfulness in which people were thinking about things. So as such a hats off to all of you that are participate in our comment thread and our question asking and stuff. Just truly wonderful. All right, folks, with that, I'm actually going to call it a night. I hope you all have a beautiful evening. Please don't forget to subscribe. If you haven't already, feel free to reach out to us. Let me know some topics and stuff that you would like for Dave and I to kind of discuss. And also, please consider, if you know anyone that you think would be a great guest on the live stream, reach out to me. Let me know who you think would be a great guest. And we are in the process of starting to book our live streams in the new year. So please reach out and let me know. All right, friends, I hope you have a beautiful evening. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and take care and be safe.